For much of U.S. history, the Alamo has served as a symbol of American liberty and independence. But what led to such an idea? And how might these events change our understanding of the historic Last Stand? The building we now know as the Alamo was originally built by Franciscan missionaries in 1718, where it stood as a Spanish chapel for some 70 years until it was abandoned and fell into disrepair. Through the beginning of the 19th century, it was occasionally occupied by Spanish troops, then came into the possession of a militia of Texan volunteers in 1835 upon the start of the Texas Revolution. Throughout American culture, media, and history books of the 21st century, the battle cry, "Remember the Alamo!" can still be heard. But why has this event left such a lasting impression on Americans? And perhaps more importantly, is that impression justified? To understand this, we need to talk about the Texas Revolution and what led up to it. After winning its independence from Spain in 1821, Mexico opened the region of Texas to Anglo-Americans, aka white, Protestant U.S. citizens, in an attempt to populate an otherwise barren and underdeveloped land. 2 years later, in 1823, Mexico announced that it will not tax any Anglos who settle in Texas. This sparked a mass migration of settlers who were accompanied by thousands of African-American slaves. Then, in 1829, Mexico abolished slavery, and they do this 36 years before the U.S. To try to get around abolition, plantation-owning settlers, otherwise known as planters, started referring to their slaves as family servants. But as the Anglo population grew, they became emboldened and began openly referring to the illegal labor as such, slaves. And to add to this, by 1833, Texan planters began importing boatloads of African slaves directly from Cuba, and Texan slave catchers began abducting free blacks from the Caribbean to bring back to their plantations in Texas. To combat the rapid growth of Anglo immigrants in Texas, as well as the resurgence of slave labor, Mexico reimposed, or brought back, the Texas tariffs that they lifted 7 years earlier. This angered the Anglo-Texans, as they saw their new home as a sort of tax-free haven. Over the next 2 years, the Anglo-Texans and Mexican government became increasingly more hostile towards each other. Many Anglo-Texans refused to pay the tariffs, and the Mexican government has become quite angry that Anglo-planters continued to import slaves, but they feel ultimately powerless to stop them. During these conflicts, a charismatic general by the name of Antonio Lopez de Santa Anna led a successful rebellion in the Mexican capital. After Santa Anna took control, he soon began centralizing the Mexican government, giving it more power over regions like Texas. Then in the September of 1835, Mexican forces arrived in Gonzales, Texas, to confiscate several cannons that they had given the Texans to defend against Native American raids. The Texans responded from the opposite bank of a nearby river by challenging the Mexican forces to, quote, "come and take it." This challenge sparked the first proper battle of the Texas Revolution and quickly caught the attention of Santa Anna. Shortly after, Santa Anna ordered his troops to attack the settlement of Gonzales, and thus began the standoff at the Alamo. Over a several-day siege, the Mexican military will take the mission-turned fortress and kill over 200 Texans inside. To this day, the sayings "come and take it" and "remember the Alamo" are still commonly used to signify American liberty and independence. But how might our understandings of them change when we acknowledge the fact that illegal slave ownership, abduction, and tax evasion lay at the heart of them? And well, that conclusion is yours to make.